Hands up for the. Are we live? We're on live. Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. I'd like to, as chairman, welcome you, all the members of the committee, members of the public, to the meeting. My name is Eric Kerry, and I'm chairman of the meeting. Remind members that the meeting is being broadcast live, and I've just checked, and it's working. I also remind members to use microphones when speaking, and so they can be heard on the broadcast, but also please switch them off when you've finished. Before we begin the meeting, I'd like to remind those members of the public that are present that placards, banners, advertising materials and similar items are not permitted in any committee meeting and must be covered or removed. Failure to comply may result in the member of the public being asked to leave the meeting. Members of the public should remain seated during the debate and not do anything to endanger the health and safety of any person. Members of the public may record proceedings and report all public meetings. Any person recording the meeting must not disrupt the good order of the meeting. And can you please ensure that mobile phones and other electronic devices are switched to silent, please? So I'll move on to the item number one, substantive of the agenda, is to note the appointment by full council on May 2023 of myself, Councillor Eric Kerry, as chairman, and Councillor Mike Introna as vice chairman of the Nottinghamshire Pension Fund Committee for the 2023-24 municipal year. So can I ask committee to note that, please? Okay, thank you. Second item is to note membership of the committee for the 23-24 municipal year. The membership is set out in the report. Since the agenda was published, one nomination for a district borough council has been received, and Councillor Devinda Verdi from Rushcliffe Borough Council has been appointed. So we'd like to note that. I see that Councillor is not here today, so it's a good start. So moving on then to item number 3. The minutes of the last meeting held on the 27th of April 2023, starting at page 5 of the pack. Can I ask if there are any comments, any corrections to the minutes? I've not found any myself. Okay, can we have a vote to approve the minutes, please? All those in favour? Thank you very much. And item 4 is apologies for absence. So, Joe, can I ask you to confirm any apologies and substitutions for today's meeting, please?
Thank you. We have apologies today from Councillor Clark, who's being substituted by Councillor Allen, and from Councillor Francis Purdue Horan, both from Nottinghamshire County Council. We've also received apologies from Yvonne Davidson, Sue Reader, and obviously Councillor Verdi, and he apologises because of the tight turnaround between the elections and his appointment, so he's elsewhere committed.
Joe, and may I welcome Councillor Allen to the meeting. Hope you enjoy it today. So moving on to item number 5, then is declarations of interest by members and officers. So 5A, do any members or officers present have any disclosable pecuniary interest to declare, please? Please indicate. I see none. Do any members or officers have any other interests, either pecuniary or non-pecuniary, to declare, please? No. Okay. Thank you very much. Moving on to item number 6, we'll now receive the independent advisory report for the committee, and before I hand over to William Bourne, I'll move the recommendation, which is on page 11 of the agenda pack. And can I have a seconder, please?
I'll second that, please, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. William, would you like to take us through your report, please?
Okay, thank you very much. I'm on rather earlier than usual today. I'm really going to focus on 2 points from my report, and the first one is inflation. Clearly coming down. The latest data is America 4.9%, Eurozone 6.1%, and UK 8.7%. But the question, of course, is how much is it going to come down to? And if you look at bond markets, and I'll preface this by saying they're always wrong, but they give an indication where markets are expecting inflation to come down to. They expect inflation in the US in 5 years' time to be at about 2.2%, and the UK about 3.7%. Now, I said they're wrong, and the reason they're going to be wrong this time, I think, is that food inflation is clearly a lot higher than that. We all know from supermarkets in the UK that the number is far higher than any number I've mentioned so far. And the terrible event in Ukraine this week is going to make things worse, I'm afraid. So I would expect inflation to stay a little bit higher. That said, central banks are likely to, they may raise rates 1 or 2 more times to try and keep inflation down, but probably we're getting close to the peak of interest rates. The second thing I want to talk about is actually central banks. Silicon Valley Bank failed just after I last spoke to you. And what is interesting here is the central bank response, because they guarantee depositors deposits, but more importantly, from a market perspective, they went straight back to quantitative easing, i.e. the same thing as they've done whenever there's been a problem in the last 15 years. And effectively, they just pumped money into the financial system so that nobody failed. The effect on markets has been that we've got a situation where you've got fairly low economic growth, but you've got lots of money coming into the system. And generally, when that happens, this is a very kind of broad comment, the excess money goes into financial markets. And that's why I think equity markets have been a lot more resilient than you might expect, given the background. So going forward, that is the major thing which has changed since 3 months ago. And in the short term, I therefore expect both bond and equity markets to be reasonably benign. That doesn't mean we're going back to the last 15 years of rising markets, but probably not serious problems. Because the central banks, if there is a serious problem, will again start to ease quantitatively. Can it end happily? I'm afraid not. 2 major reasons. One is that Western governments are getting more and more into debt. And secondly, central banks are finding it really difficult to reverse this quantitative easing without causing pain. So ultimately, what I'm really saying here is that short term may be okay, but chickens will come home to roost. They always do. So I still think there are problems ahead. It's just that they're probably not immediately. So let me just stop there and I'll let you ask questions about what do you find interesting.
Yeah, can I ask the first one? I totally agree with what you've said about that, about the QE and whatever, which has underpinned some of the market stability, kind of stability, if that's what you want to call it, rather than any problems that are hitting us. When you say it's not sustainable in the long run, what do you mean by that? And secondly, is there anything we need to do in terms of looking at our investment strategy or asset allocations in view of that? So, or are we set fair for the long term, which is obviously our job here is to fund long term pensions?
Yeah, I mean, I think looking at the longer term, there are 2 major things which will at some point go wrong. And when I say at some point, it may be many, many years, even decades ahead. One is the cost of money has risen. And therefore, some people are going to find themselves unable to refinance whatever debt they've got. And that's when bad things happen. When somebody can't repay somebody, they fail. That has an implication, secondary impact. So that's the first thing that's going to will almost certainly go wrong. The second comes back to inflation. When you have this much money flushing around the system, inevitably it's going to end up in inflation. So I think, what can we do? I think we still have to keep the inflation protection as best we can in the fund. And the one area which I think I and officers are looking at quite carefully is index-linked gilts. I'm sure I've mentioned this before. If not, I'm bound to mention it many times in the future. But index-linked gilts today are yielding a roughly 1% positive yield. A year and a half ago, their yield was roughly minus 3%. So you were paying 3% a year for the benefit of complete inflation protection. That wasn't worth it. But at plus 1%, it is looking more interesting. And we've been having conversations with LGPS Central as to whether we should start an index-linked gilt weighting.
Thank you, Will. The other question is, do you think we need to get together and have a working group just to have a mid-term review of that, or are you happy that we're set fair at the moment?
I'm reasonably happy in the short term. I think come next January, we'll do the normal strategic review. That will be the time to do it.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Chapman, I think you indicated. Oh, you would have. Okay. Are there any other questions or comments from members, please? I don't see any. Okay. Well, thank you very much, William, for the report. Thank you. We supposed to note, aren't we? Can I ask members? I'll move that we note the report.
My apologies. Yes, I second that,
Yes,
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Number 7 is the works programme. The recommendations on page 16 of the agenda pack. Can we just consider any amendments are required to the work programme? I formally move that recommendation. Seconder.
Second that, please, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mike. Tamsin, can you take us through your report, please?
Thank you, Chair. In the appendix, you can see the work programme for the rest of the committee meetings for the current cycle. The committee is asked to identify any additional reports required. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Tamsin. There are some items at the back to be placed. Are these up to date? Have we any further comments about those? I think we've got.
Just in terms of
Microphone.
Yes.
we will bring a report once we understand.
Sorry, we will bring a report. We've been waiting for the consultation, which was issued, I think it was early last week. So we're looking at the implications of that, and there'll be some discussions and conversations about how that's going to impact our McLeod project. So we will bring something along that lines. The regulator's code of practice, we're still waiting for that, Chair, and as soon as we have that, we will again bring something. It was due to be out in April, it then was due to be out in May, and it's now June, so we're just waiting. So I can't really do anything until we do.
Thanks for that update, John. Any other questions or comments about work programme, please? Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Chairman. This is something I touched on a couple of years ago, or even a year ago, about tobacco, and it was included in the work plan, and not much particularly came of it at the time. I've recently read a newspaper article in an online publication called the Hucknall Nub, and that talks about Nottinghamshire and the harmful impacts on finance and smoke, and how Nottingham and Nottinghamshire aim to be smoke free by 2040. And there's a quote here from Councillor Matt Barney, and I'll just read it out. It says, Councillor Matt Barney, Nottinghamshire County Councillor, Cabinet Member for Adult Social Care and Public Health, said, smoking is an addiction that mainly develops in childhood. We've made a lot of progress to reduce our smoking rates, but smoking is still one of the largest causes of health inequalities across Nottinghamshire. We want to create a world where those born in Nottinghamshire never smoke. Fantastic. I then gone onto the website for the Nottinghamshire Pension Fund, and I've clicked on our holdings, and I can see as of the 31st of March this year, we do actually hold a direct investment. You can see it there if you go on our website under fixed interest in British American Tobacco, and that's a £2 million direct holding. In light of Councillor Barney's comments, is this something we should discuss at a working group or in the full council? I will say that as that is a fixed interest holding, that's a no strings attached loan. So we don't actually have engagement on that particular holding. You could argue that, well, that's the fund manager's discretion, but I would say it's in the mandate of the pension committee to say we want to exclude tobacco holdings directly and also indirectly in the pooled funds. And you could argue, well, it's in the fiduciary duties of the pension fund to hold tobacco stocks as a defensive asset in a downturn. However, I would argue with regulatory changes across the globe, with tobacco causing health inequalities and financial issues. And we know in Canada that tobacco companies are now deeply investing in recreational drug use, such as cannabis. If you have a change of government in Canada, as an example, that's stopped with Tank. Do we ethically want to be involved in this? So maybe the exclusion of tobacco from our pension fund, where we have millions of pounds invested, should be added again to the working group or here at the pension committee to exclude these holdings in light of the comments from your colleagues.
I agree with much of what you say, and I think that's an interesting point. We could do a working group. It's what we can do is another matter. And we have discussed this about other exclusions before. Interestingly, I do follow that personally, and I may have mentioned before that both my parents passed away because of smoking-related illnesses, and not very nice. One at 47 years of age. So I am interested in what you say and would like to support that with a working group. However, I think it is much more complicated than what you've just said. You may have seen in the very recent news that Philip Morris, the biggest tobacco, I think, producer or seller in the world, have just indicated that they're changing their business strategy from tobacco supply to improving people's health from tobacco. So I think that's an interesting point you raise, and I think if we can get a small report or something done, and we'll feed that back. So thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Is that something we could bring to debate here at the pension committee? Because I'm sure people do have strong views on that particular issue, and it has impacted and touched people's families, and I think it is of interest of our members. So after that report, it'd be fantastic if we could have that debate here, because I think it could be a big win if we could exclude tobacco from this pension fund, especially £2 million loan. That's like a lottery. We can't even engage when it's a loan. That's a no strings attached loan. Thank you, Chairman.
I just said I'll talk to officers. We'll talk to officers about that and get back to you very quickly about what the options and opportunities are in going forward. Okay, any other questions or comments, please? We've moved recommendation, been seconded, cast to a vote for those in support of the work programme, please. Okay, thank you, that's unanimous. Moving on to item number 8, it's the fund valuation and performance report. And before I hand over to Tamsin, who will introduce her report, I'd like to move the recommendation, which is on page 28 of the agenda pack. May I have a seconder, please?
Second that, Mr. Chairman, and reserve my right to speak.
Thank you, Mike. Tamsin, would you take us through your report, please?
Thank you, Chair. This report is to inform the Nottinghamshire Pension Fund Committee of the value of the pension fund at the end of the latest quarter and provide information on the performance of the fund. The table in paragraph 3 shows the valuation at the end of March, at the end of December, and the value a year ago. The fund investments have increased by 95.7 million, which is 1.5% since the previous quarter. Within this valuation is 508 million of infrastructure investments, over 100 million of which is now invested through the LGPS Central Infrastructure Funds. Infrastructure investments are now 7.9% of the fund, with 9.9% of the fund committed to infrastructure. Paragraph 6 shows a more detailed analysis of valuations by portfolio, and paragraph 8 shows the unaudited fund account for 22-23 and comparative figures for last year. Paragraphs 9 to 20 relate to the fund's holdings in fossil fuel companies and investments in sustainable equities and renewable energy. There are a number of caveats that need to be understood in interpreting this disclosure, which are explained in the report, and I refer members to these. Over time, it is anticipated that fossil fuels will decrease as a proportion of the fund, and that investment in sustainable equity and renewable energy will increase, but this long-term trend will not be smooth. At the end of March, we had an estimated investment of 195 million in fossil fuel companies, which is 3% of the fund, and sustainable and renewable energy investments amounting to 823 million, or 12.8% of the fund. Members are reminded that a more thorough assessment of our exposure to fossil fuels through our equity investments is provided by LGPS Central's carbon risk analysis. The core index portfolio section reflects the equity market movements over the last quarter. The Schroders portfolio shows the regional analysis of holdings and purchases and sales during the period. And the LGPS Central portfolio shows our investments made through the pool. Aberdeen have continued to manage our property portfolio. The specialist portfolio section shows the composition and valuation of the specialist portfolio and the transactions during the quarter. And the section on responsible investment activity summarises some of the responsible investment activity which has taken place during the quarter on behalf of the fund. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Tamsin. Obviously interesting to see that the core index equities underpin the growth in total in the period, even though there's one or two small reductions in the numbers. And also LGPS Central performance, slight increase. Okay, are there any questions or comments, please? Councillor Intro, Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the report, Tamsin. I'm always interested in looking at the sustainable investments, and obviously it creates a lot of dialogue within this committee and at the working parties. And whilst acknowledging in sort of paragraphs 11 through to 17 the data that we sometimes use and receive in terms of those valuations and how we log what is sustainable and what is a fossil fuel, and there's still some issues around that. The way that we're measuring has been pretty consistent over the last few years, and I took the opportunity to just look back at the last couple of years' reports. And if we look at 31st of March 2020, total fossil fuels was 103 million, and we're now at the figure that you've just given us of 194. The sustainable and renewables, however, has gone up from 141 to 823. That's almost a 6 times multiplication. So, it's pretty positive news as I can see. We all know that fossil fuel valuations have been high over the last year, so it's also encouraging to see that that's actually dropped over the last 12 months. So, well done and thank you.
Thank you, Mike. I concur with what you just said. Are there any other questions or comments on Tamsin's report, please? Okay, I see none. So thank you very much, Tamsin, for the report. Excuse me. We've moved the recommendation. It's been seconded. Can I take a vote by show of hands, please? All those in favour of the report. Any against? Any abstentions? One abstention. Thank you. It's carried. I'll now move on to item number 9, which is exclusion of the public. We now move to that part of the agenda that proposes that we meet in closed session to consider the exempt information agenda items 13 and 14. I therefore invite the committee to resolve that the public be excluded for the remainder of the meeting on the grounds that the discussions are likely to involve the disclosure of exempt information as described in Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972, and the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. I'll move that. I'll ask for a seconder, please.
Second that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Can I take a vote? Show of hands, please. All those in favour of the exclusion. Anybody against? Any abstention? Thank you. That's carried. So we move into exclude part of the meeting. So I'll pause for a while, wait for any members of the public to leave the chamber and live stream to end. Thank you.